Imagine waking up and realizing that every single dollar you earn under $150,000 is tax-free. No more income tax taken out of your paychecks. More money in your pocket and less going to Washington. Sounds incredible, right? Well, that's exactly what President Donald Trump is proposing. But is this plan realistic? And if we're not paying tax, where does the government get the money to fund everything that it currently does? Today, we're going to break it down and see what this could mean for you and the economy as a whole. To start, let's talk about what this proposal actually means. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick recently stated that Trump's goal is to eliminate federal income taxes for all individuals earning under $150,000. Now, if this were to happen, millions of Americans would no longer pay federal income taxes, the vast majority. This is a drastic change from the current system where everyone pays at least some share based on their income, well, most everyone. The impact will be massive. The federal government collects around $2.4 trillion in income taxes per year, making up nearly half of all federal revenue. The majority of those taxes come from high earners, but middle-class taxpayers still contribute a significant amount. If this policy were enacted, a major source of government funding would completely vanish overnight. So, how does the government make up for the lost revenue? One of the ideas floated by Trump's team is, big surprise, tariffs. Lutnick suggested that increasing tariffs on imported goods would help cover the shortfall, but let's break that down. Tariffs are taxes on goods coming into the US, usually paid by businesses importing those products. The idea is that foreign countries or companies bear the cost, but in reality, businesses often pass those costs on to consumers through higher prices. That means you could end up paying more money for everyday goods, everything from cars to electronics and even groceries. There's also the question of whether tariffs alone can generate enough revenue. The US collected around $80 billion in tariffs in 2023, a fraction of what's needed to replace the revenue lost from eliminating income taxes on those earning under $150,000. To close the gap, tariffs would have to be raised significantly, which could disrupt trade and strain relationships with other countries. Beyond tariffs, there's the issue of government spending. With less tax revenue, would we see cuts to essential programs? Social Security, Medicare, defense, infrastructure, all of these rely on federal funding. While some argue that government waste could be trimmed to balance the budget, cutting waste alone likely wouldn't be enough to offset the revenue lost from this plan. Historically, governments have explored unconventional ways to raise money during times of crisis. War bonds were a major tool in both world wars, allowing citizens to invest in the government, essentially loaning money to be repaid at some time later. Some states have turned to lotteries to boost educational funding. Could a national fundraising campaign work? Perhaps an optional Patriot bond that allows Americans to contribute voluntarily to offset tax revenue losses. While these methods have worked in limited circumstances, relying on voluntary contributions alone is unlikely to be sustainable at a federal level. One idea that has been discussed is the potential for an expanded federal VAT, or value-added tax. Many European countries use this system, which taxes goods and services at every stage of production. A national VAT could generate significant revenue, but it would also impact consumers by raising prices across the board. It kind of defeats the whole purpose. This could be particularly difficult for lower-income households who spend a larger percentage of their income on essentials. Would this trade-off be worth it at all? That's the key question policymakers would need to consider. Now, let's break down the impact on different groups. Retirees could benefit since they live on fixed income and wouldn't have to worry about income tax. Business owners might see an advantage as well, depending on how corporate taxes are handled in the broader plan. But government workers, their jobs could be on the line if federal budget cuts were needed to compensate for the revenue losses. Public sector workers like teachers, firefighters, law enforcement, and federal employees could be among the hardest hit if revenue shortages force budget cuts. If the federal government brings in significantly less revenue, local and state governments may also be impacted if federal funding were reduced. Would these workers have to take pay cuts? Would layoffs be necessary? These are all real concerns when considering drastic tax cuts like this. Do we just increase the deficit? What about private businesses? With more money in consumers' pockets, businesses might see a short-term boost in spending. However, if tariffs drive prices up or if government funding projects slow down due to budget cuts, businesses that rely on federal contracts or public services could face serious setbacks. Construction, infrastructure, healthcare, and defense industries could all be affected. Would removing income tax under 150K increase consumer spending enough to fuel economic growth? In theory, if people have more money in their pockets, they spend more, stimulating businesses and growth and creating jobs. However, if prices rise due to tariffs or inflation, that extra income could quickly get eroded. If governments turn to debt to fill the gap, that could lead to long-term economic consequences like rising interest rates or devalued currency. Another concern is how this change would impact financial markets. Investors and credit agencies monitor government debt closely. If the US runs significantly higher deficits to offset lost revenue, it could lead to a credit downgrade, which would make borrowing more expensive for the government and private businesses alike. This in turn could lead to slower economic growth, or even a recession, or maybe even a depression. There's also the international perspective. The US dollar is the world's primary reserve currency, and any major change in tax and revenue policies affect global markets. If confidence in US financial stability weakens, we could see volatility in exchange rates, trade agreements, and foreign investment alike. Countries holding large amounts of US debt like China and Japan could react by shifting their investments elsewhere, leading to unforeseen economic consequences. Another factor that we need to consider is the effect on state and local governments. Many states use federal income taxes as a model for their own revenue collection. If the federal government eliminated income taxes entirely for earners under $150,000, will states follow suit, or will they need to increase their own taxes to compensate? This could lead to a patchwork of tax laws across different states, further complicating the financial landscape for Americans. Additionally, there's the question of behavioral changes. If income taxes are eliminated up to $150,000, can we see an increase in underreporting of income? Business owners and self-employed workers might structure their earnings to remain under the threshold, reducing the overall tax revenue even further. This could lead to new loopholes and unintended consequences that make the tax code even more complex. Finally, the question of political feasibility remains. Even if this proposal is popular among voters, how likely is it to pass through Congress? Would it require budget reconciliation, or could it face significant opposition from both parties? Historically, major tax overhauls have taken years to negotiate, and even then, they often result in significant compromises. What we're hearing now is a broad idea, but the details would need to be worked out in a legislative process that could change its structure entirely. At the end of the day, this is a bold and radical proposal that would transform how the US government funds itself. Whether it's realistic or not depends on the details. Details that haven't been fully explained yet. But one thing is clear. If this plan moves forward, it would fundamentally reshape the way Americans think about taxes and government spending. So what do you think? Is this a game-changing move for the middle class, or does it create more problems than it solves? Let me know down in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because I don't charge you any tax, no matter how much money you make. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.